So for those of you who didn't already see this lecture or don't know who I am a 5th year in my doctoral program. I'm completing my doctorate in summer of 2019 in clinical psych with a specialty in child adolescent who focus primarily on substance use, trauma, and loss. That's kind of where my research has come from, what my interests are, things like that. A little about me. I did my undergrad degree at Tulane in New Orleans, and I worked a lot with Hurricane Katrina survivors, even though it was like 10 years post the storm. So that's kind of where my trauma and that piece came from. And then I came to grad school and just kind of continued that journey as I've gone. Another big piece of my current research is self-care and burnout, and how if you are struggling in certain domains, you're not going to really be fulfilled in all aspects of your life. Even if 4 domains are really good, 1 is not so good, that's going to eventually take its toll on you. So that's a little bit about me. Basically, other than FAIR, I've worked at 3 other year-long practicums. This is my 4th rotation. They've all been specializing in children, adolescents, and trauma primarily. I've done crisis screening, I've worked at a child hospital on a medical floor, and I've done testing at a therapeutic day school. So that's kind of a little bit about me. This is 1/3 of my dissertation. So my dissertation, I've been working on it for way too long, but at least 3 years now. And it's basically how internet is impacting self-care and burnout. And today I'm going to talk about the internet piece and what the research is suggesting, why I'm concerned, and why I think screen time and technology is potentially detrimental to society. Has its perks, we're going to talk about that too. But we're also going to spend some time on the things that I find very concerning and potentially very alarming for long-term consequences that in the moment we're not really realizing. I've written many papers over the course of my education, and at some point I spend more time trying to figure out how to start the paper than actually writing the paper. And then I'm like, that's kind of boring. Who wants to go to the library when I could be doing so many other fun things? Because that's way better than sitting at a library. So I somehow at some point end up spending 2 hours watching memes or like stupid cat videos that is irrelevant to my education. But I then realize I've been here for 2 hours and I've seen 13 different ways a cat can stand on an elephant. Or I've seen just ridiculous animals that I don't even know what they're doing. But I actually have yet to start the paper. If anything, I put my name on it and that's a success. But I've wasted a lot of time, procrastinated beyond belief, and this is where I ended up. How many times has this kind of been what your family dinners looked like? Or have you seen somebody in a restaurant and everybody's on their phones and everybody's not paying attention? How many times have, just by nodding your head, have you seen this or experienced this? How many times have you guys said, hold on, and sent a text message and neglected to interact with the person who you was face to face with? Has that ever happened? I've done it. I'm as guilty as the next person doing it. So at one point, you're saying, I'm not going to talk to this person, even though it's my child, or it's my parent, or it's my friend, or it's my significant other. I'm going to send this random message that's probably irrelevant in the long term, because how many of you have done that? Remember that message. Was it that life critical and that important? No, it was probably, okay, see you Tuesday. That could have waited the 30 extra seconds to engage whoever came to you with the question. So this is what alarms me when I see people like this, because I do it as well. I'm not excused, but this is what concerns me, is when we sit here and we're spending more time in our devices and we're spending more time not engaged with those that actually matter. We spend more time worrying about the person who's, okay, I'll get Chipotle on Wednesday at 3. That sounds like a great life choice. Or we're worried more about our Friday plans than talking about whoever actually is going to be there in our biggest time of need. I don't really particularly like social media. I don't really like internet or technology. It's just never been my thing. So part of this is my own stuff where I'm like, I don't get the draw. But why does everybody else seem to really want to do it? So this is kind of where part of this research came from. So a little bit about internet. The internet kind of began, it's much older than we actually think it is, but it began several decades ago when some really smart guys at MIT wanted to talk to some really smart guys out in California at UCLA and Stanford. And they were like, well, how can we talk to each other without having this huge delay and playing phone tag and all this fun stuff? And the military really wanted to develop all these cool technologies and all that fun stuff. So a bunch of really smart guys figured out how to do it. And it was primarily just for military use. This was back about 50, 60 years ago is when it all began. But nowadays, in the 90s, there was a couple really smart guys. They were like, we really kind of want to make this public. Why just for military use? Why not everybody? So then they got together, they did a lot of cool little stuff, and now pretty much everybody has it. It's not something that you can avoid. By nodding of your heads, how many of you have a smartphone or at one point had access to a smartphone daily? How many of you have access to internet use on that smartphone? Or iPad, or computer, or laptop, or something along those, some form of device? Pretty much everybody, especially in this country. Now this country is definitely the front runner, but how many of you who are students have homework that requires you to use that type of technology? Probably all of you. My generation, which now I feel old saying this, well that's kind of weird, but I was the last generation where everything was written by hand. And I'm not much older than a lot of people in this room. So it's kind of, this is the beginning of what we're seeing. So it's kind of, okay, we don't know what actually it's doing. It's cool. Who wants to lug around 5 books when they can put everything on a Kindle? It's better. That's more convenient. But are we actually being detrimental to future generations? I'm going to argue yes. So basically, everybody in this country has access. There's very few people who don't. Even people like myself who don't want access still has access and still uses it way more than it's recommended. So you guys are millennials, most of you, and you guys spend anywhere from 10 to 20 hours a week on devices. It is not recommended to do that. On average, you guys spend primarily most of your time not doing your homework on these devices. If you were, I may have a different argument, but you're not. I'm not either. I don't do it for my homework. You're actually using it for social media, watching Netflix, watching YouTube, and whatever you find on YouTube, potentially engaging in unsafe behaviors such as gambling, pornography, online shopping when you don't have the money to be online shopping, and all sorts of things that potentially cause you to have negative consequences later, but in the moment feel good. And in future slides, I'm going to talk about how internet addiction parallels addiction with drugs, and it's activating the exact same pathways. So as we go, there is no primary difference in terms of how the brain interprets these behaviors versus doing drugs. So that's where this is kind of going to lead to. Okay, so the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is kind of like the big guru where everybody that went to Harvard who then went into pediatrics and then does a lot of research gets jobs. So if you are 18 months or younger, it is recommended no screens. Don't have it in front of your kid, year and a half, nothing. If the child is between 18 months and 24 months, 2 years old, very minimal contact. Ideally, none. But at this point, the kid is kind of walking, talking, crawling. They're no longer in kind of mom's and dad's arms 24/7. So there is this chance that they're going to be kind of branching out. They're going to wander away. But it is recommended to no solo use. Don't get here. Entertain yourself. Watch Dora the Explorer or whatever the current thing is. It is pick up your kid and play with them, count to 10 with them, teach them their ABCs. It is not, here, I don't have time, this will be your newfound babysitter, which often is what happens. If the child is between 2 to 5 years, so pretty much preschool age, 1 year or less. And this is kind of like, still obviously they don't want you to exceed that, but it's definitely the less you use, the better. And 6 and older, that includes adults, myself included, 2 hours or less. By nod of heads, how many of you are on the computer more than 2 hours a day? Pretty much everybody, even if you're not intentionally. And that includes not just work. That includes, ooh, I'm at the red light, I'm going to send a text message. Or better, don't do that either, but better than driving and texting. But that includes, oh, I got a half hour before bed. I'll watch Netflix for, 1 episode of Friends or whatever your new show is. That includes that. It all comes together. It's not just I sat down and watched for 5 hours and Netflix told me to get off and asked if I was still alive and conscious and reading, and it said continue watching. That's not what that means. It's these little increments that we're not even consciously aware we're doing. We're just doing it because it's there, not because we're thinking, oh, I'm bored. Oh, I'm sad. Oh, I'm this. Oh, I'm that. It's here. It's basically an extension. By nod of heads, how many of you, if you lose your phone, freak out? And you're like, how many of you when the little red line says, oh, under 20%, where's my charger? The world will end if I don't have a full battery, and I can't wait until, and you literally dysregulate. Adults do it too. Every single person is just like, I cannot handle when my technology is about to die because it can't wait. Why can't it wait? That's my question. Why can't it wait? So this is a study that was done in 2017, and it followed a bunch of children. And basically it found that for children who did not abide by these recommendations, so these are children who were 5 and younger, and they had the parents constantly recording how often they were engaging in screen time. And so what the study found was because of when you develop speech, and when you start to begin to learn to talk and form sentences, by 2, you're kind of able to have like basic sentences, a couple words here and there. You're able to communicate your needs. You're not just saying ba-ba and da-da and things like that. You're able to kind of communicate with your kid at around 2 years old. That if these were not followed, that these kids were nearly 50%, 49% increased risk of having speech delays. Of the 894 kids, half of them showed the signs. Half of them. It's over 450, almost 450 kids had speech delays by age 2, simply because, now there's always extenuating circumstances, but because they were constantly watching screens versus mom and dad or guardian talking to them and communicating with them, reading stories to them. This was what caused this. They also found that not quite at 49%, but there was they followed these kids, they want to follow these kids because a lot of them began to display impulsive and aggressive behaviors. So they're not able to be patient, essentially is what they found. They're not able to sit, they're not able to wait, they want it now, and if it's not given to them, they have a temper tantrum. So now we have these kids, and these types of behaviors lead to an ADHD diagnosis when your kid's 8. Is it ADHD, or is it because they watch more Dora the Explorer on the Kindle than mom and dad reading and mom and dad playing and being outside? Kids don't play outside like they used to. Okay, so some positive things of the internet. I don't think it's all bad. My whole dissertation means I'm a complete hypocrite because I've spent over 1,000 hours reading things on my laptop in order to do this research. And how I collected data for my dissertation was via surveys on SurveyMonkey. So I'm a complete hypocrite. I'm full disclosure, complete hypocrite in order for me to complete my degree. So it's fun. You get global connection. You can learn new cultures, learn new languages pretty quickly. You can have communication. Family members that don't live in the same state, awesome. Now I don't have to send them a letter and hope to God they get it in 6 months. I can just pick up the phone and FaceTime. I can see them. I live out of state from all my family. It's pretty cool to FaceTime. I used to only be able to see them on holidays. But now it's like, or I could hear their voice, but now I can literally see them. It's fun. I get that. People say online gambling is a heck of a time. They don't like what it leads to, but they say in the moment it was kind of fun to kind of get that ding, ding, ding. It's kind of fun to watch Netflix for 10 hours on Saturday and never put, anything but sweatpants and order a pizza. That's kind of fun too. I get it. I do it. Communication in terms of or wealth of information. You're able to kind of just type it in. Google, how do you? What is the? Google fills in the gaps. Back when I was in my undergrad, I used to have to go and look on library bookshelves and find my information. And I see some parents nodding yeah, me too. Nowadays, I don't even know if a kid would figure out how to use a library because you don't have to. You can find every article you want within seconds, which is cool, especially since I don't want to spend any more time on my dissertation than the next person. But I'm actually not retaining. Studies find that when you're using technology like this, you're skimming it, and how much of you are actually remembering? Not much. When instead, if I had to take the time to then say, go to the library log, find which section of the library, oh gosh, the library is 20 floors high. This is gonna take me forever to find these 6 books that I need to write this one paper. But I'm gonna go look for it, I'm gonna find pride in that, I'm gonna find hard work in that, I'm gonna find honor in that I then went and wrote a paper, and it's going to retain and it's going to make me feel more proud. So there's all this stuff that, like, as good as it is, there's always a flip side to every coin. And all I'm saying is maybe we need to be more attuned to the flip side of the technology coin. Some negative aspects of the internet that we are starting to find is physical health concerns, mental health, addiction, and we're restructuring the brain. That goes back to the addiction pathway that I talked about earlier that I'll get into in a minute. Physicians are finding higher blood pressure in children. We're finding diabetes being diagnosed in children that we never used to see. We're seeing obesity. We're seeing issues with sleep, mental health, depression, anxiety, social aspects, isolation, hopelessness, self-harm. People are using this as a way to feel connected to others. And they're like, well, the internet makes me feel like I have more friends. It makes me feel happy. What the studies are showing, long term, they feel less happy. They actually feel more hopeless. The internet is not the same as having a conversation. It's not filling that void long term. Addictions, porn, gambling, shopping. Basically, everything on the internet, as good as it can be, there's always those ones that I don't think mom and dad would want to see in your search history. And I don't think your jobs would want to see in your search history. Brain restructuring, impulse control, it's activating the frontal lobe. I'll get into that. Because of this, we're seeing decreases in academics. Kiddos that can't retain information, kiddos that can't be patient enough to sit there through a lecture to retain information, their grades are going to decrease. They're going to have behavior problems. They're going to have executive functioning problems. They're going to just sit there and say, if I can't get it now, I'm not going to try to get it later. So we're seeing this when we do these types of neuro studies. So physical health, kind of already went over it. We're seeing both obesity and underweight. So kids who don't fit normal developmental birth weights. Basically, overweight is because you're probably mindless eating, is what they're tending to say, is like, watch a couple episodes of New Girl. Half a potato chip bag later, ooh, didn't realize I was now I ate the whole bag because Netflix just told me that I have watched 8 episodes. It's a lot of episodes. And it's now 11 p.m. So we're seeing that, mindless eating while we watch these programs. We're also seeing underweight, is kiddos who are missing meals. Oh, started watching at 3, now it's 10. Skip dinner. So these kids are losing weight and it's concerning. So docs are concerned with it. High blood pressure potentially could lead to diabetes, heart problems, everything along those lines. And some of this is not because of internet use, obviously. Some of it is for other reasons. But it's definitely something to be aware of, that you're just increasing your risk, potentially having chronic lifelong illnesses that could potentially have been avoided. You can't avoid everything, obviously. And sleep difficulties. So on average, because of your guys' age, it's recommended between 8 to 10 hours. Adults 6 to 8, give or take. So basically, we'll say 8 to 10 is what, in an ideal world, never happens. Nobody ever achieves this. We would want. Now, there's a lot of things about sleep that I'm not going to cover today because we could do a whole lecture on sleep. But basically the thing is you kind of go through cycles. So you have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and REM. REM is where this is kind of a light sleep, moderate sleep. You're getting into stage 3, you're getting into heavy sleep. This is if someone's sleepwalking, like that type of stuff where you're like, what are they doing? That's what's going on here. REM sleep is when their eyes are moving and they're twitching, but they're actually kind of atonic and they're not really activated. So this is when you're in your heaviest sleep. 1 complete cycle, which means you go from 1 to 2 and then you wake. Everybody wakes several times a night. Most people don't remember waking. It's about anywhere from 90 to 120 minutes. It's 2 hours. So basically, if bedtime is 10 p.m., you got to get up for school. We'll split this in half. We'll say 7 a.m. to get up for school. You're going to kind of do this. You're going to go, woo, you're going to hit REM. You're going to come back up, and you're going to wake here. Most people don't even, the theory behind it is, evolutionary speaking, is that you wake because back before we lived inside and we lived in the bush, it was a protective factor, so we were attuned to our environment for predators. Now that we don't, have wild lions potentially going to eat us in the middle of the night, we still do it, but it's not actually adaptive at this point, so it's not really something that we become consciously aware of doing. And then, so this is 2 hours. Oops. 2 hours. So now it's about, this is around midnight. And then you go right back down, you come right back up. 2 a.m. and you wake again. And then you go right back down, come right back up. 4 a.m. Well, now you've had about 6 hours. So you've gotten at least the majority of what you need, ideally. So then your body's like, I'm feeling pretty refreshed. So you kind of come down. You don't get all the way down again. You kind of just dip here. You don't actually ever get back into REM. And you may wake up for good here if you're an adult, or you may, if you're a teen, you're probably going to do this again. And then this is when mom comes in and says, get out of bed, you got to go to school, the bus is coming, and the fight happens. Because you're not ready to get out of bed. This is normal. This is what we want. This is ideal. This is not what we're doing. So one of the things that the sleep studies are finding is that they're saying no technology use of any type, TV, phone, laptop, anything that has the blue light that kind of radiates into you, into your eyes. None. An hour minimum before bed. So if you're going to bed at 10 p.m., means no technology use from 9 p.m. till 10 p.m., ideally. Be overachievers, shoot for 8:30, because it's really messing you up if you don't. So what happens when melatonin, everybody has heard that term, right? So you need it to sleep. If you're struggling with sleep, oftentimes doctors prescribe you over-the-counter melatonin. Take that, it helps you kind of regulate your sleep cycle, gets you into a circadian rhythm. Well, if we're not able to sleep, or if mom says go to bed at 10 p.m. and you're like, cool, I'm in my room, but I got that Kindle hidden under that mattress. Mom doesn't know about that. I'm actually not good. I'm gonna watch 4 episodes of some show. So now we're pushing it over here. So you're eliminating this. Because yeah, you were in bed. You weren't asleep. You were watching New Girl. You were watching CSI. You were doing maybe not some other things that we don't need to, mom wouldn't want to talk about. Okay, so now it's midnight and you're actually going to sleep here. So you've eliminated this entire piece, so you're gonna wake up and you're gonna be tired. But now you've activated the brain in a way that thinks it's aroused and thinks it's awake. So in actual, yeah, you're tired, you're gonna shut the laptop off at midnight, but you've activated melatonin, like you've decreased your levels of melatonin when naturally they were supposed to be excreted to help you fall asleep. So what we're finding is that even if you shut that off, you're not really falling asleep till 2 a.m. So this one's gone too. So now, at best, you're getting this. And you're really getting 5 hours of sleep when your developing brain needs double that. So now you have people who, 5 hours sleep, everyone's gonna wake up crabby off of 5 hours of sleep. There's not a person exempt from that because it's just not how the brain works. But also teenage brains develop till they're 25. So you're continually going to then hurt your brain's development. So now education's gonna be harder. You're tired, so you're not gonna be paying attention. You're crabby, so you're gonna get in fights with mom and dad. You're gonna get in fights with principals and teachers at school. You're not gonna wanna do this. So what they're finding is that of course everything goes into the toilet. Of course grades go down, social skills go down, of course. Because in actuality, it's just sleep. I remember when I first started my graduate work, I had a professor who said, don't you diagnose until you know if they're sleeping. And I was like, oh, that's kind of a weird thing for him to have said. And I was like, okay. And then he went on this whole rant about it, about how it's unethical, and blah, blah, blah. And then, in the moment, I was like, cool, that was 5 hours of fun, and I left, and I didn't really think much about it. But then I started doing my research, and I was just like, oh, can I diagnose somebody who's impulsive or angry or irritable with some form of mental health diagnosis when they're actually not sleeping? Is it true depression? Is it true ADHD? Is it true anger, impulsive stuff? Or is it just because they're tired? One of the things that people don't understand is depression in adults looks very different than depression in young people. Depression in adults, you kind of get that decreased mood, that hopelessness. In toddlers and teens, kind of between ages 5 and 13, 14, they actually look like ADHD. They're tired. It's just how the brain functions, guys. So you have all of these concerns that potentially are just not true because you're not sleeping, because you're watching Netflix, and God forbid we can't, we have to watch 14 seasons within a week. We can't wait and watch 14 seasons in 14 years like the show was produced to do. Because, I gotta watch every episode of Game of Thrones before I turn 18. Okay, so mental health. There are some studies out there that are suggesting that it does a lot of good for mental health. People feel more connected. They're like, yes, somebody finally understands me. I live in this town, nobody gets me, nobody likes me, I don't really like myself, so I'm gonna go on these worlds where other people feel similar. We're gonna talk about why everything in my life, I don't like it. We're gonna talk about why I don't feel like I fit in. We're gonna find that bond. But what the studies are finding is in the moment, yes, increased social support, increased self-confidence, increased self-esteem, decrease in loneliness and potential symptoms of like depression, anxiety, and all of the things that nobody really wants to feel because they're maladaptive like us feelings and they don't feel fun. In the moment does the trick. Long term though, what we're finding is it actually increases everything in the moment you think it decreases. Because now you feel like, yeah, I found this one chick, she's, I'm in this blog and she feels just like me, but oh crap, she lives in Australia. I live here. Guess we'll never meet. So now I still feel alone. So the one person who I finally thought was going to change my world and make me feel like I fit in, I'm not going to. Unless, decrease in academics because you're spending all your time trying to feel better. Who opened the math book? Nobody. Who studied for the test? Nobody. Who wrote the paper the night before when they should be asleep, but instead they said, oh, can't watch Netflix tonight. I haven't written my term paper, so I'm going to cram it out between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. for a 9 a.m. deadline. It doesn't work. Procrastination doesn't make you have best work. You might make the deadline. It's not your best work. It's just not. So in actuality, you have the increase of risky behaviors, which correlates strongly with the addictions. You have the impulsivity. You have the stuff that mom and dad, I'm going to reiterate, don't want to see on your history. Increased depression and increased anxiety. Kind of with this, you get the increase in suicide. You get the increase in self-harming behaviors. You get the increase in just aggression in general. So this is a quote that I think is a pretty powerful one, and I don't know if you can read it from the back, so I'll read it out loud. I feel technology has brought so much joy into my life. No other activity relaxes me or stimulates me like technology. However, when depression hits, I tend to use technology as a way of retreating and isolating. So now what are we doing? We feel depressed. We don't feel like we're fitting in. We don't really like these feelings. We feel hopeless, worthless, sad. I'm going to go right to those chat rooms that I think I feel better in, and I think I found a connection with. But in actuality, you're sitting there talking about your depression and why it sucks and why you don't like it. But what it's actually doing is it's refueling this prophecy that I don't fit in. Nobody understands me. Nobody accepts me. Because all you're doing is you're sitting in it. You're not trying to change it. You're not trying to activate it. One of the things that research suggests is for these two, and I'm sure people in here have heard this from other counselors, is when this stuff is going on, you have to face it. If you run from it, it gets worse. If you avoid it, it doesn't get better. So what we're finding, now they're on these blogs that they shouldn't be on, and they're just not happy. So the depression continues to go down, and nothing comes back from it. So it's just something that I think is concerning. In the world of psychiatry and psychology, there's the DSM, which is kind of the big guru of all mental health illnesses and diagnoses and things like that. And it's not yay big, and every 20, 30 years they revise it. They recently did that a few years back, and this researcher, Kimberly Young, she's been doing a lot of work on internet addiction. And so how they rule out all these new diagnoses and they confirm the ones that should stay and should go and things like that. So there's this big conference with a bunch of old guys that have a lot of degrees and a lot of time on their hands, and they all come together and they fight. And they say, no, this one's good, this one should stay. Or, no, this one's not so good, this one should go. This one's not really relevant to society, or we need to modify the criteria in order for somebody to get this diagnosis, blah, blah, blah. They fight for years. They revise it 20 times. And then at some point, a decade later, we actually publish it. So, there's kind of some flaws in that system, but that's another story. So in the most recent one, DSM-5, which is what we currently use today, there was this huge debate on internet addiction. And she went to this conference and she was like, yes, it needs to be in there. Everyone's addicted to technology. Every person in the room shot her down. Said, no way. And normally I would ask a question about why do you think that is, and the answer to that question is because nobody wants to admit that they're all addicted. You got a bunch of the biggest brains in the country fighting over how to then diagnose everybody else in the country, all while on their phone in a business meeting. And she's sitting here saying, you guys are all addicts to the internet. And nobody in the room wants to say, yeah, I am. They all want to be in denial, because who wants to take the phone away? We already talked about we freak out when it's below 20%. We freak out when we can't find our charger. Gosh forbid the dog ate the charger and now it's cut in half. We have to run to the iTunes store and we freak out until they have a wait list. Oh my gosh, I have to wait till tomorrow? I'm never going to get my phone. It's terrifying. So she's basically in a room with the smartest brains in this country, and they all told her to take a hike. But she's published more information on internet addiction than pretty much anybody out there. And she said, I disagree with every one of you. We're all addicts, myself included. Because all of us agreed that we use it more than 2 hours a day. And we all agree that when it gets taken from us, we freak out and we want it back right then and there, and that we'll do anything to get it back. I will tell Mom every word in the book that I can think of because she took my Kindle. I don't care that I disrespected Mom. In the moment, I might later when I'm like, oh crap, now I'm grounded. Dang, that was not a good choice. That was not a smart one. We all might think that a week later when I'm washing the car for the 10th time, or when I'm scrubbing toilets here at Fair. But in the moment, we tell Mom to take a hike twice till Sunday. Because she said you can't have your computer. She didn't say you did anything wrong. She didn't say you were a bad person. She didn't say anything. She just said, no, you need to go to bed. You didn't want to go to bed because I'm on that Game of Thrones binger and I got to watch, 18 episodes between now and Friday because I can't not have all 85 seasons under my belt. Can't sit there and miss one. That would be the worst moment ever if I have to go to school and I've only seen 10 episodes and everyone's on episode 11. Going to fall apart. Other addictions, gambling, pornography, shopping. Nobody wants to talk about this one, but everybody's doing it. Parents, be aware. Sorry, kids, going to tell them that. This and this, if you don't have the money, people don't seem to realize that credit cards don't care about that. Just because you have a credit card does not mean that you have money. It means that you have to pay that money back at some point. Credit card debt, terrible. You're never going to buy a house. You're never going to get approved for a loan. Well, why? When I was 15, I racked up $10,000 on Ma's card. So she's not going to co-sign for me. Well, now I'm 20 and I want a car. Ma told me to take a hike because she's still paying off $20,000 of debt. Because I felt like at 15, I knew how to play blackjack online. And somehow I found this card. It sounded pretty cool. Or the other one that people are doing with this, let's open like 18 credit cards. I got my credit card for work, got my credit card for my kids, and I got my credit cards. Every time you go to a store, they say, you want to open a card with us? This is what is going on. They're taking advantage of your impulsivity because they're like, I don't actually care if they can pay it back. That's the bank's problem. That's their credit score's problem. It's not my problem. It's not Banana Republic's problem. It's not Gap's problem. They're getting paid. They don't care that you then have to then work 2 jobs just to keep your house. They don't care you have to take out other mortgages. They got a cool sweater out of it. And I made 5%. This is what they're doing. That's why casinos don't have windows. That's why casinos don't have clocks. That's why casinos are cold, because they want you to stay. That's why casinos reinforce these behaviors. They're not just absent-mindedly people out there putting these businesses out there. These are very educated people who are taking advantage of you. And you should know what their backdoor hope is that you open 15 accounts and then you try to go buy it back at the casino. It doesn't work, guys. It really doesn't. So just all of this, the slots, instant gratification. So restructuring of the brain. Dopamine is released when we are having fun. Woohoo! This is that feel-good pleasure of, oh, that was fun. So when you do drugs and you get that high and you're like, best moment of my life. Don't care that I have terrible relationships with my parents. Don't care that I'm flunking school. Don't care that I have all these hopes and dreams that'll never come true, because that was freaking awesome. Moment, instant gratification. That's what was being released in the brain, dopamine. It's what activates the reward pathway. For those of you who have been around, I'm pretty sure you've probably heard that. Kind of goes from the middle of your brain, goes up to the frontal, and it comes back. So it kind of goes like that. And all while it's doing that, you're saying, this is the best thing I've ever chosen to do. Don't care the consequences. What we're finding, internet does the exact same pathway. Your brain doesn't know the difference between Netflix and cocaine, because the same pathways are being activated. Comes in here, woo, that's fun. Does this. Frontal lobe, this is all your executive functioning. And for people who don't have fully developed brain, this is the last thing to develop. Kind of goes back to front. This is more where basic survival is. Kind of how do I get my needs met? This needs to develop first, because we're born basically as a helpless individual. Infants would not survive without the help of others. This is like, oh yeah, I should not run that red light. Oh yeah, I should probably not cheat on that test. Oh yeah, I probably shouldn't get in that bar fight. Oh yeah, I probably shouldn't take mom's credit card and then go play some poker. This is where this comes from. Oh yeah, I probably shouldn't cuss out a staff member. Oh yeah, I probably shouldn't just go put a hole in the wall. That's what this part does to the brain. That's this piece. Back here, you're not so worried about it. But guess where it gets mostly activated, because it's the first line that it gets shot to. It's this piece. So what we're finding is that when somebody constantly kind of overstimulates this part of the brain, impulse control goes right down the tubes. But you don't get it back because your brain's not developed. You can get part of it back. So I was talking to somebody the other day, and the way that they described it was they were training and they had a supervisor who was like, if you have a TBI or a stroke or something, you can get close to. The odds of you fully recovering 100% to where you were prior to the incident, not likely. You can get close. But it's years and years and years of therapy and working those systems to build back what you lost from those types of situations. It's the same thing with this. We're activating this and we're destroying this because we're taking away what is naturally. Just like we do with sleep and our melatonin and we throw that all out of whack, we're doing the exact same thing with our executive functioning by doing this. Drugs and internet does not matter. The tests show you're doing exactly the same thing to the brain. So this is kind of this is the brain. Front, back, internet addiction. This is where it blows up when we look at brain scans. Here's where computer screens blow up. Okay, cool. Sensory. This is where our smartphones activate. Touching, engaging, feeling. This is where that activates. Video gaming. Hippocampus. Instant gratification. If you connect these dots, this is what it does. That's the reward pathway. So when you're sitting there on a bender and you're on the phone, on the computer, playing some video games, got your headset in, it's all this, but breaking it down into what parts of the brain are activated based upon how you're engaging with it. This is the reward pathway. This is when the dopamine spike. You're like, this is freaking awesome. I love it. Absolutely love this feeling. Don't like that term paper. Tomorrow's problem. It's future me's problem. I really like, though, everything that on my Call of Duty has to offer. But we're activating it. And when our executive functioning, first and foremost, it's the last to show up in everybody. Nobody's exempt, it's just biology. But when we're taking it away, we're not getting it back either. You can get some of it back, you can't get all of it back. But what people don't realize is you don't just get it back overnight. You don't wake up and you say, I don't have any impulse control issues anymore. That's kind of cool. I went to one therapy session. That was a lot of 1 hour, cool. Remember, we're putting screens in front of toddlers. There's not a toddler in this room. There's not a toddler in a high school, but we have a lot of this going on in high schools and in college campuses, and now in CEO and business meetings. There's a lot of times at business meetings, people do this. Adults are not excluded. I've sat in many meetings and it's just adults, and I don't think any of us retained a penny because, God forbid, we now have these apps on our laptops that we can text from. That's pretty cool. Because I need to text, about the Super Bowl on Sunday versus paying attention to what my professor has to tell me about how I'm going to graduate from grad school. Because, yeah, my friend needs to know that I would like, spicy wings. We got to make sure my B-dubs order is correct for Sunday when I'm spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on education, and this is the person who's going to tell me if I can graduate or not. I'll send that message. Absolutely. It's way more fun. So this is what we're activating, and we don't get it back. We can get it close, but it's years and years and years and years and years because it's been years and years and years and years of abusing this pathway. We started this tiny, and then they do it for 10 years before any form of intervention occurs. It's 10 years, not quite, but it's going to be at least half of that before it's like you're close to. How many times have you heard somebody who said, I had a stroke, but they don't just have a stroke and walk out the hospital. They go to a rehab facility. That's like 24/7. Then they bump them down to outpatient. Then they bump them down to, a couple times a week. Then they bump them down to 1 time a week. And by then it's 3 years later. It's the same thing we're doing, but we're doing it almost unconsciously and we're hindering everything that we can do.